Everyone's kind of doing something really interesting. So I'm going to have them, generally, you don't let people talk about their company, these things. It's uncouth. But since it's such a new industry, it's really relevant here, what their company is, what they're doing, and what the business opportunity is. So let me start with introducing folks. I'm going to start on the end. First is Jeb Terry, VP, Partner and Program Development at Fox Sports. He works Fox Sports Lab, exploring new technologies, and they're used across every screen with a focus on VR and 360 video. He spent 5 years in the NFL playing offensive line for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and San Francisco 49ers. Fun fact. Next, we have Owen Hurley, VP Creative for Technicolor's Animation and Games Group. He has extensive directing experience across film, games, television, animation. He's charged with driving the artistic and creative expertise of their VR and AR applications. Then we have Dylan Flynn, who is Business Development Agent at CAA, Creative Artists Agency. He focused on the agency's virtual reality and augmented reality efforts. He began his career at Electronic Arts, then worked in directing investments, VR investments at Rothenberg Ventures. They're doing a lot of interesting stuff there. It'd be interesting to hear their perspective. Next, we have Jason Fiber, who is head of business products at THX. There he oversees global deployment of business-to-business software with a focus on improving audio and video experiences across AR and VR markets. A lot of people, we were just talking to a lot of people, underestimate the impact of audio in VR and how that really changes experience. He's going to shed some light on that. And he has he's been in the music industry for a while and a spokesperson on evolving tech in the music industry. Then we have Dane Smith over here, head of business development for Third Floor. In his former life, he was a visual effects producer. That's right?
That's right.
on a bunch of different features. He worked on The Amazing Spider-Man, Looper, stop motion animated feature. How do you say
Anomalisa.
Anomalisa, which was nominated for an Oscar. Yay.
There's one fan. You must be the person that saw it. Thank you.
And lastly, we have Jorg Bachmeier, who is SVP of Content Strategy and Co-Productions for Machinima, international television and digital media executive, extensive track record in financing, producing, distributing entertainment across multiple platforms, multiple countries, including like 360 franchise development, gamification, immersive storytelling, VR, AR experiences, and social media. All these guys are experts in VR in a fairly new industry. So let's start with Dane. Just share with Third Floor, how Third Floor is participating in the AR VR community.
So our approach is to invest heavily in personnel and build an architecture that's agnostic, so we're not tied to a specific head-mounted display or a specific game engine. We are seeing early monetization in our business-to-business model, and what that means in plain English is we're deploying this technology on set. We're exclusive visualization artists for Lucasfilm, Disney, and the Marvel Universe. So these tentpole films quite often have a large element of CG characters in them, and it can be challenging for the crew on set or even the team in pre-production to imagine the composition and scale of the shot that they're designing or that is designed in the script. We deploy tools on set and use the head-mounted displays to allow the creative team to start to build that world at a very low impact financially, and then to step on set with full confidence that the final result will match their expectations, and to ensure that all the stakeholders are on the same page. These days there are a lot of opportunities in transmedia, so at the same time the film is being developed, the theme park, VR and AR experience are being developed. So that's our primary method of monetizing it. In addition, we have created some one-off experiences. First The Martian, next Raising a Ruckus, which launched at the IMAX VR Center, which if you haven't been to, you should really take a look at. That retail end of VR and location-based entertainment, I think, is about to really come online. And we created a tool set that allows producers to come into our studio and see what the game mechanics are.
What are the distribution platforms your stuff are playing out on?
Steam is where The Martian's available. The IMAX deal is with their centers, which are these retail centers that you go in. Same way you would see a film at the ArcLight. You go online, purchase a ticket, and show up, put on a head-mounted display, and experience the Raising a Ruckus piece we created.
Thank you. So let's go to Jorg next, and from Machinima. Talk about how you guys are approaching the VR space.
Yeah, for us, say using game engines is not entirely new. It's the art form of machinima, machine and cinema. So we're around 12 years. And now, of course, now is the next evolution of going into VR and using, headset. But that said, we create more and more in our VR studio, VR experiences. But the more important screen is still, and you might be surprised, the 2D screen. So what we do, we're very personality influencer driven, and we put the influencer in VR experiences and then pretty much play it out in classic 2D to leverage the Machinima network, what is all about gamer, geek culture, fandom. So 2D is still, while we don't have this mass platform yet, or the mass market, for us, a very, very important tool. To connect the emotions with these influencers and not just a very isolated passive experience. And then still show off immersive technology, get close to what the developers and specifically the game publishers developers created. For example, we created a Mass Effects experience where we put invited influencer in the experience. We used assets from the Mass Effects video game. We included Bill Nye as a narrator. He had scientific facts, he had science fiction facts, and we let them experience the experience, but then again, the 2D output was more important to share with a whole network and not just with some individuals or first movers in VR.
How do you think about the storytelling aspect from the game story perspective, the stuff you're doing?
It's a loaded question and a big question, and the one here in the audience who figured that out should talk to me quickly. I think it's a new medium, and somebody who says, I figured it out, I'm not sure if I can believe that. I think I heard the quote, we paint in VR, and in parallel, we try to design the paintbrush, and that's exactly happening. So for me, the similarities to gaming, while it's not a game, but it's also not linear storytelling, but you can steal a lot interactive elements. So you create an immersive environment in the first place, and then in this environment, you make a deep dive into it. Cannot wait, by the way, for Fallout 4. I hope it's coming soon. And then you create this environment, but then you create cues, actually, what trigger story elements, But what And of course, then, looking at the panel, you use sound effects, you have to pay attention to certain elements in the game. How do you do it? Sounds, lighting, architecture, even psychology, behaviorism. How do you behave in this new space? But again, I don't have the crystal ball. A lot has to figure it out. I think AI is more and more important. So how is the engine really interacting with you? Right now, it feels as a very isolated experience. It's, wow, great, but nobody really connects with you, what brings us later probably to social VR. But I think good storytelling, the human connection has to be part of it to really go back to traditional 3-act storytelling and go kind of the hero's journey through this journey with interactive elements.
Okay, we'll get back to that storytelling aspect in a couple of minutes. Let's go to Owen. So Owen's a Technicolor. I think no one will dispute that Gone with the Wind was an awesome film, and you fully enabled that experience. But so what's Technicolor doing today, and why in the VR space? And
Why am
what's
I
your
here? Yes, Technicolor is 101 years old this year. We're a global creative technology company at this point. We always were, except it used to be film processing and chemicals, and I think it was 2015 was the last time that we processed a frame of actual celluloid. We've been completely digital since then. We created over 50 immersive experiences last year through our various different companies. MPC is a visual effects company that's part of Technicolor. which has a large VR-focused group, both on the film side and on the advertising side. The Mill is also part of Technicolor, more on the advertising and sort of new technology space, where they've produced a lot of both AR and VR immersive pieces. I work with the Animation and Games Group, which is a 1,500 strong animation studio in Bangalore, India, where I lived for a couple of years as creative director. We've put together a VR group that partners with the Technicolor Experience Center, which we'll talk about a little bit, I think, in terms of what we're planning with that, to create immersive experiences. So we do a lot in the space. We do a lot in visual effects and animation, and work with gaming companies. We work in multiple game engines, creating entertainment and sort of helping creatives redefine or define what story is in this space, which I think is a key component of what we're all here talking about, as the conversation evolves past the technology that we use to tell the stories and into what the actual content of the stories is.
What do you think? What are some of the most transformative VR experiences that you've either been involved with or you think that are out there?
I mean, I'm really looking forward to seeing Inarritu's piece. I don't know if you've read anything about that. He's showing it outside of Cannes right now. It's coming to LA actually, which is great. It's coming
What's it called again?
It's called Carne y Arena, or Arena, if somebody speaks Spanish. It's an immersive piece that he's done. It's an installation where you're actually sort of taken through with a docent through an experience where you take your shoes off, you're walking on sand, you've got a backpack and a headset on, and he's talking a lot about redefining what story means to him as a director who's spent his entire career kind of framing, on a screen in 2 dimensions and guiding the viewer's emotional experience through a story, and how he's embraced a 3-dimensional virtual space and how to guide that emotional journey. And I can't wait to see it. I'm sure he's using a lot of the visual tools of guiding the eye and so on that we've all evolved over the years in filmmaking. But I'm really interested to see where he takes that.
Thanks. And then Jeb from Fox Sports. Talk. What's we could spend another hour or 2 on sports itself, but what are you guys doing in the sports space? What are you doing now, and what do you think is in the near future?
Yeah, I think as with every emerging technology, we try to figure out how do we leverage that to present our programming in a better, more immersive, next level way to our fans, right? Whether it's studio shows or the live events, everything that we're producing around sports, we want to help extend that to the fan and give them a better experience. One of the challenges is the production on TV is so good, right? Watching a football game on TV is a great experience. And then being at a big game, it's also a great experience, but it's a different experience, right? There's the sound, the energy. The great thing about sports is when you're at venue, you feel the energy in the venue, right? It's palpable, right? And then in between is kind of where we see the VR space, right? Is how can we help bridge that gap where maybe we can extend something beyond just the TV screen and give that fan something more immersive, or how do we bring probably some of that stadium energy back to the fan if they can't make it to the game? And so there's this middle ground there, which we're exploring pretty deeply. We have our own standalone Fox Sports VR app, and we've done a lot of our sports, whether it be soccer or basketball with the Big East or Super Bowl highlights, what have you. We've been very progressive and pushing hard in that space. And right now, we want to make sure that fans can access that content, right? Not just in headset, but also in the 2D space, right? From a Magic Window perspective. And that's where we're trying to explore is how do we achieve scale right now with these productions? Because it's not a small feat, right? You have to have people there with special hardware. You have to have developers creating the consumer-facing products as well to engage that content. And so how do we merit that investment while also at the same time making sure that the work's getting seen and we're driving value from that.
What are
And-
what are some of the projects that you guys have done or are doing? Where can we see them?
Yeah, so in the Fox Sports VR app, you can download it on Android and iOS, and it's both headset and straight smartphone. We also can share VOD clips on any of the social 360 players as well. So we kind of look at both the live event drop-in experience as well as long-tail VOD. So how do we take a great moment that maybe we captured at the corner of the end zone and make that live on as maybe that new water cooler experience where it's like, wow. Imagine the one-handed OBJ catch from 2 years ago on the pylon, right? It was famous. What if you had a 360 camera or a VR camera in that pylon? And so now instead of just looking at it, you can go and actually be that pylon as he's catching that by you. And so thinking about the extension of those moments and how do we bring more immersive moments to the fan as well, or is all on the spectrum of what we're trying to do to bring all that action to life for the fan.
Anybody in the audience seen any VR sports content? And then, so let's go to Jason, THX. Talk about, before I talk to, it obviously sounds important in all media, but I didn't realize how transformative it can be before I spoke to Jason. Can you talk about what THX is doing in the VR space with sound?
Yeah, so THX historically was a brand for cinema, and then we moved into consumer electronics, trying to stay ahead of the curve. VR is obviously a new medium. There's not many standards. We don't have certification programs for audio yet, but we do have one for what we'll call virtual cinema. We've been spending a lot of time looking at how our tools can serve the audio community via partners and both through IP we've developed in-house. The notion of having audio in VR is much greater than I think a lot of people have spent time researching to date. You hear in 360 degrees, you don't see in 360 degrees. So how do you capture that same experience when your ears are receiving information from all directions when you're limited to 2 channels or headphones? So there are ways to correct for that with algorithms. There are ways to calibrate that with different types of solutions that take into account your actual body, your head, the distance between your ears. And then there are just simple corrections for hearing imperfections, each of which, when combined, can allow for a more realistic audio experience, either in VR or just simply watching content in a virtual room where you want to have a surround sound experience. So THX as a brand has evolved from its early George Lucas Star Wars days, which is where we still have a lot of acclaim, but we haven't really been in that world in a bit, although we're returning to it somewhat. We've moved into an area of looking at what is best practices for different kinds of consumer electronics, and then we've now developed a technology group, which is also developing their own solutions for things like amplification and for audio in VR. And eventually we'll be working within the visual space, but for now it's limited to audio.
Are there any productions that you mentioned that really use sound in a transformative and interesting way that you've seen?
Not that I would say you should go out and check out. There's an app on the iPhone, which I unfortunately have forgotten the name of, but it's sort of like a old Westy Day of the Dead kind of app, which is an all sound app. If someone knows the name of it, please feel free to shout it out. But that's pretty transformative when you're not actually looking at your screen. Just to sort of give a metaphor, when you're watching a horror movie and you're scared, the first thing people do is actually turn off the sound, because that's where you're getting all of your horror cues from. And so when you're just simply watching something, it's a lot less scary than when you're hearing it and watching it. So for now, there hasn't been a lot of great VR content that's truly immersing you in the sound. But there's a lot of work being done on that space. I would say it's probably more in the 2D screen space, where there's different plugins you can get for your devices that will give you a virtually active sound field that can replicate the sensation of 5 or 7 speakers with a subwoofer. There's probably 20 different solutions out there, but combining them into a product that takes into account your personal profile, that's the challenge, and that's really where I think we'll have something unique shortly.
Dylan, thank you for your patience. Not traditionally a characteristic of an agent to be exceptionally patient. how's CAA approaching, the VR space, and also love to hear, like, you guys are signing up clients. What are the skill sets? Because it's a pretty new space, and there's so many different aspects. Like, what are the skill sets of the people, and the qualifications for people that you take on as a client?
So we're there both for traditional talent when they want to start exploring new mediums of VR, AR, when they have a story like Inarritu's story, he says to himself, what's the best way to tell the story of a Mexican refugee, of someone coming into America, and he determines VR is the answer. So we have to be there to help him find the right partners, the right distribution, the right methods to make that happen. Just in the last year, some of the biggest directors in the world, Jon Favreau, Catherine Bigelow, and Inarritu have all started to explore stories in VR. So we're there as a landing pad for them. And then more often, we're now starting to find emerging creators and that skill set and signing new creators in production studios. The skill set that we look for is obviously evolving. Anyone can make VR to a certain extent because VR can be so many different things. But what we really view VR and AR as is the most technically demanding art form there is in the world. So what we really need to look for are people who are very comfortable in technical capacities as well as creative capacities. So not only do you understand game engine technologies, 3D development, 3D art, character design, but you also understand script and acting and all the kind of theatrical elements that go along with it as well. And there's very few people in the world, I think, that can do both very well.
I was thinking, there's probably like 3 people. And then you guys are also investing you have a fund that's investing. What is the approach there, and what kind of stuff are you investing in?
So the larger fund, which is Evolution Capital, Evolution Media, they've invested in a few studios, Weaver, Baobab, Jaunt, LiveLike, and then CAA Ventures has a smaller fund that invests in mostly infrastructure, Immersive, a VR ad platform, Experiment 7, a social tabletop AR, VR platform. So basically just trying to help build the market in the industry more so than we're helping even individual creators and talent right now, because we want to make sure there is a market for our creators when they go to address it.
So I want to talk a little bit about just where things are going and some aspects of technology that are going to change things. Dane, we were talking about the future of location-based entertainment in AR, VR, and how that would change the experience. Can you elaborate on that?
So my initial exposure to this technology was location-based entertainment. I was brought in to produce a theme park in China, and we were producing the media, but the dome hadn't been built yet. It was a dome show, one of these multi-projector, very technical deployments, and the company that we were using to create the media was in Korea. We were based in Santa Monica. So I hired a director, and he asked me to set up an Oculus workflow. This is about 3 years ago. I had read some things on blogs. I had been exposed to some of the technology, but really had not dived into it yet. So we scoured around and found a couple of DK1s. We ordered the developer kits. They were so back-ordered that we ended up going online and buying used tech. Hired a friend of mine, a really smart coder. He wrote a Unity app in about 2 days, and we were able to take the Maya assets, port them into the headset, take the CAD drawings from the architects of the dome, and do 360 dailies. And that was the wake-up moment for me. I saw the future of this technology as a development tool for the type of work that I do. Within about a month, we were able to set up a laptop and send a DK1 to Seoul and have our animators in dailies with us. So we had this real-time experience, and I spent most of the day on this show wearing a DK1 and working with my director to create this universe. So my early exposure to it was creating media for a theme park. We're engaged in theme park creation right now that I can't talk too much about because of non-disclosure agreements, but what I can tell you is that the creation of the media is the same technology that I just described, but the user experience will also involve mixed reality. I think it's going towards a more holographic or AR experience than VR. We were talking just before we started the panel, and while there are some experiences that lend themselves to being isolated, we're doing an architecture piece right now for a museum, for Smithsonian, where you really want to focus on what the architect is saying and how they designed this piece, and you want minimal distraction. But most of us, when we're experiencing media or entertainment, it's a communal experience. When I go to a theater, I just saw Get Out. What a fantastic film. And it wouldn't have been as great if I wasn't there with an audience that was laughing and being frightened with me. And I feel like sometimes the VR experiences and the closed experience can limit that. So I feel like the theme park world and location-based entertainment, which many are predicting will be the first mover in this space, the first generator of revenue, will go to more towards augmented reality, where you're seeing the real world and then it's being augmented with graphics and visuals that people like the Third Floor create.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of throw that to Owen also, like who you were mentioning being in the theater makes a great experience. When we were talking about the isolating nature of VR and that more communal experiences are essential for growth. Can you?
I think the social component of VR is going to be essential. I think, from exactly what you were saying, I took my a year ago. I think I fly back and forth to India a lot still, and a year ago I took my gear on the plane, thinking that would be great. I'd sit on a beach for some of the 24 hours that it takes to get there, or run a variety of whatever VR apps I happen to have. And within a few minutes, a maximum 10, 15 minutes, I was ripping it off, because we have, I think, a sort of a lizard brain aspect of ourselves that we need to know what's going on around us, and especially sitting on an airplane. I was sort of immersed for a few minutes, and then envisioning fires and riots and mayhem, and I needed to rip it off and see what's going on. So I think the social component is critical, and it's we kind of, as a company, we sort of focus on 4 pillars that we see as key sort of indicators that we focus on in terms of our development and technology that are going to lead to sort of mass adoption of immersive experiences. And social is one of them. The actual quality, visual quality of the experience is something we're focusing on a lot also. I think episodic, the cadence of the experience is going to be key too, where right now we deal with, the odd one sort of pops up and raises its head above the kind of waterline, and we'll sort of rush to go and watch it, but it's a couple of minutes and it goes away again, if we can find which platform to watch it on in the first place, with whichever headset it takes. So I think there's the quality, the social component, and a cadence to the experience are going to be key things.
I went to that IMAX VR center the other day with my 14-year-old, and we were both in different pods, fighting in the same game. Our avatars were next to each other. We were talking to each other, fighting robots, and it was good bonding experience because we had a
Right.
mutual enemy.
It's more fun, right?
Yeah, it was transform. I highly recommend checking it out. They charge like $7 to $10 for like a 10-minute experience. You can experience multiple experience, haptic suits and things like that.
Our R&I group, we got a big group of research scientists in Rennes in France. We just won an award for embodiment and social component to VR, which we're going to be demoing at the Experience Center soon.
Yeah, but it seems like sports is like communal experience is the future of sports VR.
Yeah, social is imperative for the VR experience. There's 2 ways to think about it. Is that if you're watching a game, you're typically watching a game with friends or family, or you want to go to the watch party at the bar or whatever it is, because of the experience that's created. So there's that aspect of figuring out, okay, how do someone mimic that? Can you port that person to that bar and the watch party? But there's also the nature of, I live in LA, I love the Tar Heels, right? My best friend's in New York. Can we go into the same suite and essentially watch together through an avatar kind of reality, right? There are challenges with that, but progress is being made on the digital side, where it's starting to become more and more reality, where instead of only calling them to talk about the game, we can essentially watch it with each other in this virtual kind of world. there's the notion of, is an avatar really going to work? Is it really, the wall seems like it's going to be broken. And of course, always with the, how do you actually find your friend in VR and the onboarding process and all the stuff that goes through to make it a seamless thing. It has to be ridiculously easy to be able to coordinate and connect with my friend across the country to watch this game. But that's where everything's trending. And I think, as you mentioned, that's where I think adoption really takes off, is when social is actually not an extension of VR, but it's part of the VR experience. Both from that immersive aspect, but also connecting with those people around the events and sports that you love.
Jason, we talked about your virtual cinema certification, the idea of strapping a cinema on your face. Like that thing. Can you shed some light on that program?
Well, it actually speaks to his experience on a plane with with the gear. I mean, we are not comfortable letting the world go around without awareness. So some sort of opportunity to enjoy something you're wanting to have a high-class experience with, like the cinema, but being able to do it in the privacy of your own home without having to invest in an expensive home theater is one way of doing that, right? The other would be, how do you do it when you're traveling, where you don't want to necessarily completely block out the rest of the world, but you want to still have something that's a cut above the little tiny monitor that they give you if you're lucky on your seat or your tablet or whatnot. So the technology's there. It's probably the lower hanging fruit of technology because it doesn't require a great degree of interactivity. It doesn't necessarily have to be social, although it can be. But the quality of the picture in terms of some of these new technologies is actually quite high. 4K quality, certainly high-end television quality, so you can get a virtualized screen once you figure out what the optimal distance is and what the optimal viewing size is. And there's a lot of companies developing products today that are specifically designed to allow for that. Some that allow interactivity with the world, some that block it out completely, but either way, giving you either a private experience that you may only want to have at home or one that you can be in a public environment and enjoy without necessarily feeling like someone's putting gum in your hair or something. But either way, you can still get a large screen, high quality color, high quality sound experience, independent of gaming, independent of all the other stuff. And that seems to be, at least for where I sit, a great first step to wider adoption. Because one of the issues that I think is stopping wider adoption is just simply the complexity of getting into the device.
Yeah.
There's a whole rigmarole you have to go to, and anyone that owns a Vive or owns a Rift or something like that has gone through this where I'm going to fire it up, and I've got to update the software, and I've got to update that piece of software. Oh, and now my graphics card has to be updated. Oh, I got to stick my phone in. Oh, I've got to tune my phone so it's in the right. By the time you get through all this, God forbid you've got like a child waiting to jump into the experience, you're just like, I'm over it. So, starting with something that I think people are used to and allowing them to grow through that into it is a great way to bring a massive audience into something where a higher end experience is already being developed and you can bridge to it fairly easily.
So you guys but you mentioned you're doing this certification.
Yeah, so we're looking at a lot of different devices. We have a lab, we have tests that we've derived both from our 3D video tests, from our cinematic tests, to be able to authenticate and certify devices that have that quality. We're hoping to make our first announcement next week. So we have a company that's got a device. They've met the level of quality that we're demanding. It's a transformative device, and we're excited to see it happen. But as of right now, it's not yet announced. But
Okay.
know.
Next week.
coming,
What day next week?
maybe 2 weeks. I think it's next week though. Yeah, next week. AWE.
Oh, wait, let's.
Probably. I'll have to
Okay.
get back to you on that one.
Jorg, Machinima. What do you like? What do you think the medium does? You guys are obviously investing in it. What do you think it does that you can't get done in other mediums? What do you think it does better than anything else? And also share like some of the stuff that you guys, some of the projects, your favorite projects that you're working on in this space.
I think to immerse in another world, that simple, that you really feel you're now part of it and you're not passively watching somebody else, who created a world. You're part of it, you create the storylines and you're part of this whole world. I think video games are leading the way more and more and get also more innovative and more intelligent. So just 2 games will come out this week. One is Superhot, you might have heard about it. That's a video game where it looks like a shooter, but it's actually the AI is very smart. You pretty much, your movement determines VR time. So if you stand still, everything is still. If you move, VR time continues. So meaning the AI is directly connected to what you do and you're not just passively are guided through some to some experience where a monster jumps out of whatever, and then you're scared. And I like that part. The other game also will be released this week, I think, is from Ubisoft, Star Trek, the Star Trek game, Bridge Crew, where it's a crew-based game, so they perfectly use the 360 environment, because you also have to, and you need to happen to sit down to be the captain of the Enterprise or be the engineer. So it's a multiplayer game with 4 people, and you have different tasks. You have to be very strategic, or this thing is not flying, as every other aircraft probably. And I like that, So it is connected. It's socially connected. You can be there with buddies. You can be there with strangers. Gamers are very, very used to connect. What you said earlier with sports, specifically in esports, to connect worldwide and be connected through the game and through the experience. And I think VR will just bring that to the next level. So something like Ubisoft, I think, is what they do now, being more smarter with having this joint experience is great. But then I think it needs to evolve, to what I said earlier with personalization, with social connection. And I'm not just talking about Facebook VR and all and Outspace VR, where we have this room where you have a party with others. It's more, I'm sure there needs to be face recognition. There needs to be inward, outward camera that your emotion is captured. And not, again, you're passive in a space. And I know a lot of companies way smarter than I am work on that right now to really capture the emotions both ways and not just linear in one way. Pretty much.
What about some of the projects you guys work, like Human Pong or?
Yeah, Human Pong was fun with Nolan Bushnell, the creator, the founder of Atari and creator of Pong actually. And he created a VR company, Model VR, and we had a bit of fun in our VR studio where we recreated Pong for the VR world. It was a wireless full body suit you're in, and you pretty much with your body play Pong. So it was a fun event. And if you have the chance to ever see Nolan, how he talks about VR is just amazing. How in 10, 20 years, it's hard to distinguish between reality and virtual reality, and how the senses, all changed that. So that was one interesting project. I mentioned Mass Effect just recently. These are just 2 recent projects where we partnered with EA, and also that for the fans of Mass Effect to get closer on a scientific way, but also on a science fiction way to your environment, to the tools, to the rover, to the spaceship. That was just fantastic for the fans just to get connected. But it was also perfect talk about also monetization, integrated marketing to promote the Mass Effect game as such.
Nolan, but I just listened. Nolan, there's a great podcast, How I Built This NPR thing. There's a Nolan Bushnell episode. It's really great. But are there anybody know of any great podcasts on VR, AR, production, what's going on? Anybody listen to any?
Voices of VR by Kent Byte is kind of the industry leading one. He's done over 100 interviews.
What's it called?
Voices of VR.
Voices of VR?
It should be, yeah.
Dylan, it's kind of a silly question, sort of. How do you know if VR content is good, and what are the KPIs for success in this space right now? What do you think the KPIs might be later?
I was talking to the content team at Oculus about the data that they have, and they brought up a funny point, which is that if we listened to the data, we would just continue to make horror videos in 360. So that's what people are doing a lot of right now. but that's not what we see the future of VR being. So we have to use more of our intuition, more of our creative capacities to extrapolate what people are going to want to do in VR. The KPIs that we look at, I think it is a myth that you can't make money in VR. People are making revenue. People are selling titles for $20, $30, $40, all the way up to $60, especially when there's IP involved. We're seeing big returns. I think the most important KPI right now is sell-through. What percentage of people who own the Rift are purchasing your title? And a lot of that depends on promotion and other things that Oculus and Vive and Steam can give you too. But whether or not, how do you determine it's good content? It's pretty much, it's obviously subjective, but it's essentially how long are you going to stay in the headset? How often are you going to come back to it?
Fair enough. Like repeat views right now is pretty simple. Views, time spent. There's no social, no really sharing aspects of that we're monitoring right now, right? We were talking something that we don't often talk about, but Dane, we were talking about B2B perspective in entertainment and the opportunity there. Can you?
So I touched on this a little with our tool set that we provide studios that allow them to use this technology to design shots. And initially, a lot of people see it as cost savings because we're in there's three parts of the production pipeline: pre-production, actual physical production, and post-production. And the largest spend is physical production, but also there's a disconnect between physical production and post-production because the goal of the people on set during production is to make their day and otherwise check off the to-do list that day and move into the next day. And a lot of times, one of the expensive components of a lot of tentpole films gets brushed aside to second unit because it's time consuming. There's a lot of questions about how it's going to be executed, and it generally is easier on set to push those decisions into post-production. And the danger of doing that is you get into post-production, you have a locked set of plates or shots, and now you're trying to create the final images, and your hands are tied. So what we're doing is entering the space. Well, actually, Third Floor is very invested in the space with the director and script from day one. So our first entry point on a project is with the director visualizing and developing the world. But what we're doing now is taking that technology on set. In pre-production, we can build a room scale volume that replicates a set, build many of the assets of the set, and have the director and stakeholders make decisions early on that will clear things up on set, win over some allies of people that may be a little reluctant to engage in this technology, and then apply a value add in post-production so that we're maximizing the spend and we're not going in circles, iterating versions of shots that the director and the team were very clear on in the script stage, but somehow we lost our way in production. That's one of the ways that we're providing a business-to-business tool set. But then the other area that is really growing at a much more rapid clip is theme parks, because these parks are becoming more and more technical. The IP is more valuable. There are longer gestation periods, and there are a lot more stakeholders. They're primarily real estate deals. They start out with a piece of land and they develop these experiences, but the ticket price is much higher, audience expectations are much higher, and to be successful, you have to have the DNA of the theme park baked into your experience. So because we are close enough to the creators at that early stage when these decisions are being made, we can develop the park experience in parallel and really capitalize on the audience's love of the IP and create really compelling experiences. So that is something that makes my company distinct and separate from a lot of companies that get involved at later stages once those decisions have been made. We're actually with the creators early on and able to, and The Martian's a great example. It's a separate experience from the film, but the director and creators were very involved in making creative decisions. So if you love the film, you'll love the experience. It's got the DNA of the experience baked into it, but it isn't just a clip from the film rendered in 360 video. We're very interested in interactive and engaging the audience.
I'll take in a minute or two, I'll open it up to questions, but I'll explore something that Dylan was talking about as far as monetization. I think that, I just bought an Oculus for my 14-year-old, and he wants to spend a lot of money buying stuff. So I'm not really that seems just as long as we get the headsets on everybody, and it's early days, the monetization's there. But on the sport, I know all the Fox Sports stuff is free now. Where do you see monetization going in the sports space?
There are a lot of opportunities to do ad insertion, right? Through whether it's putting a virtual car in the suite experience, or adding soft drink cans around the suite, and really inserting essentially virtual goods in the experience. And it really all depends on what the environment is that the fan is sitting in when they're watching this game, right? If you think about the way at a live event, there are concession stands and there are different activations throughout the venue. It's the same way you can look at that through the VR experience, right? You can access different doors or portals to open up new experiences within the core. And do unique ad insertion there. So I think there are a lot of ways, and it opens up a new form of commercial, right? Where it's a much more immersive type commercial, where it's, for example, if there's a car in the suite, can I look at the suite and then actually sit in the car and look around, right? And it's trying to understand that you have the fan in this immersive world already, and it's leveraging what that provides to create unique experiences. And I mean, once we get to scale, it's going to be much more of a reality, and we're starting to get there. But the opportunities are kind of endless. It's when you get in that unique world.
Anybody want to follow on monetization opportunities?
I don't know if I'd follow on monetization, but I would follow on in terms of usage. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of people that are excited about the technology, buying the products. From the software perspective, it's still, I think, early days, so you can't have that breakout killer title that makes everyone want to run out and buy it. I mean, it's still early days and people are kind of experimenting with it. But I think a metric that will be crucial to track is how much the content is actually used, not just how much is purchased, but how much it's used. It's a lesson to learn from the music business that was in the business of selling physical products, and they sort of stopped the tracking after the sale was made, and then the industry literally turned a corner, and now it's all about how much is actually being listened to, since it's evolved to, or will evolve to, a non-upfront purchase business, right? It's how much does this track get played, and how many times is it repeated? I think we're going to see a similar turn after people complete their purchase of the hardware and they complete their purchase of the software. How much does it actually get used? And I think the more popular played games, the more popularly viewed titles will be the ones that can attract these kinds of advertising dollars. And that is going to be much more important than this thing sold 100,000 or 2 million. This thing may have sold 200,000, but it's being watched X percentage more than something that may have sold more. So it's just a distinction that I think is worth paying attention to.
If I could expand on that,
Sure.
I think one of the missing pieces also is a critical evaluation. I try to put myself in the consumer's shoes. If I'm going to go out and buy even a Samsung Gear and then open up the store, there's no one to kind of guide me. There's no Rotten Tomatoes. There's no kind of grading or critical evaluation of this media. And it's a mixed bag. I've discovered fantastic things by doing exactly that, just going on the store or on Steam. But I've also discovered a lot of things that just weren't for me. And it isn't clear to me how the audience is going to find those great titles, or how the next great director that's probably 12 years old right now, who's going to take us into this realm with a piece that is best experienced immersively, how are they going to break out? How is their media going to get out into the world without critics and evaluation?
We got one business opportunity we've just created, Rotten Tomatoes for VR. You have a question down there? Or?
Yeah, it's a question for Dane. I saw the Martian VR experience, and it really was a catalyst for me. The one where he's leaving the pod,
The cone?
going into space.
Right.
It was emotional. It was the first time I had a really emotional experience in VR, which as a writer is, of course, what's important to me, rather than just adrenaline or the people want to see horror or VR kind of thing. My question for you is, in working on IP like The Martian, can you give us a little sense of the genesis of the VR experiences that were created in in the development? Were they a marketing afterthought to the movie? Is that how most of these things are coming up? Or are people thinking about them as they're actually developing the content, the IP?
Thank you. The Martian was developed early on, which is a best case scenario. I was just telling my colleagues before we started that the curse of VR right now is there's a lot of investment on the front end in VR. There's a lot of capital floating around out there and a lot of very talented people creating tool sets and experiences and founding startups. And what that translates to into the more traditional studio system is executives deciding that they need a VR piece, but almost too late in the creative process. With The Martian, we were very lucky. The director and the studio, Fox, were eager to explore the space and let us lead the way and start the experience as the film was being created. And there are a lot of examples of that out there right now. I know Ridley Scott's company just released a piece around the alien, and it's starting to happen more and more often. So the better pieces are created with an early genesis and with the creators on board, and it isn't really more expensive or problematic because you've got all of those people in the room, you know, developing those ideas. It just takes another person at the table to understand how to apply it to immersive media and ask those questions and start that process early, and you end up with pieces like The Martian. And we're working on a couple of others internally at the third floor right now. It initially, it was marketing dollars,
Yeah,
but
kind of a
what
starting point.
traditionally happens with marketing dollars is they get involved, they're activated later on. So the creative ecosystem is closed at that point, and really what you end up with is a 360 video. And they're cool, you know, it's great to see that stuff, but that's sort of, it's not interactive, and I feel like that's going to fall away as some of the more interesting interactive pieces come online. But it does take early creative engagement, you're right.
Yes.
Question for THX. In the early days, if you wanted to pick a theater, like now you might want to go to Dolby Cinema, or whoever it is, XD, but you're going to see the same movie. In the VR, AR world, if I want to watch an Oculus title, only Oculus or Sony PlayStation or Vive can sell software. If I want to watch something that Fox Sports has the rights to, you got my business because I can't go anywhere else. With what you're trying to do with THX, is there room for something that will bring added value where the consumer is going to be driven to the content or the product anyway? I'm a THX licensee. I just brought out a THX subwoofer because I want people to buy my subwoofer, not somebody else's. But I'm not the only person. But you can go to other people. In the AR, VR world, you can't because it's captive.
Sort of is the answer. I mean, there's a lot of hardware platforms out there. Each one has a different degree of quality. It depends upon what kind of an experience you're looking for that will channel the decision that you'll make about what you purchase. There are titles that are exclusive, there are titles that cross over different solutions. Our job is really to identify which ones have the highest quality. That doesn't necessarily equate with the best titles. We're not in the business of analyzing the software itself. It's more about how well does the device perform, how well does it benchmark against other devices, and how well does it render an experience for the user. So in terms of creating some sort of deciding factor for the consumer, if they are looking at the device and another device and they're relatively similar and they want to choose based on the axis of quality, then we have a brand that will help them make that decision. If, like, say, game titles for platforms, you don't go into a GameStop and say, which one has the best rated sound or which one has the best video quality. You go in because there's a popular game title and you want to go and get it, and you obviously have to buy the platform that you can play it on. So there's no magic bullet that I can say, yes, we'll solve that problem, because I think it's somewhat of an intentional problem. But from a quality perspective, that's where our brand has always existed, and it's where we're going to continue to put it.
I'd like to, I think you hit on a very, very important point. So from a content producer perspective, I have the same demand. Where's the standard in VR? And number one. Number two, of course, pricing. High-end PC VR is still very costly, specifically for the demographic and the first movers who are super interested. Probably that's why one of the outcomes is that mobile VR and the gear is really taking off right now because the entry is just lower.
And it's easier.
Yeah, and it's easier in a way. But I think you're right, it needs a standard in the industry. I wish there would be a standard in the industry. So.
Well, we are working on a 3D audio standard, so
That's a good start.
the video gets much more complicated
Yeah.
beyond, 2D video rendered in 3D.
One last question?
Yeah, so Paul, so Jason, so there's a whole cottage industry of companies doing QC through VR, and they're mixing and matching the software with the platforms because you get different experiences with different combinations. What are you certified? Are you looking at the software? Are you looking at the hardware? Is it the video, the audio, the controls? What are you certified?
Yeah, it's the quality of the video, the depth of the colors, the black levels, the white levels, the same sort of things that we look for in displays on the headset itself, yeah. Again, the software is somewhat varied, so the assumption is that if the device is designed to give a quality experience, the software itself will be following that. We, at the moment, don't touch the software side of it. We're strictly based on the hardware performance. Not to say we won't get there, but one step at a time.
We are kind of out of time. I want to thank the panelists. I could have interviewed probably anyone here for an hour just by themselves. Thanks for being patient and participating. Round of applause for these guys.